The sunlight glinted off the broken wheel axle like a mocking smile from fate itself. Mary Beth stood ankle-deep in prairie dust, her calloused hands gripping the wooden wrench until her knuckles turned white. The wagon loomed above her, its tilt precarious and insulting. She'd been stranded on this God-forsaken stretch of the Kansas prairie for 3 hours now, and not a soul had passed by on the rutted trail that supposedly connected civilization to wherever she was headed. "Blasted thing," Mary muttered, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. The summer of 1876 was proving to be mercilessly hot, even for someone who had spent her entire 24 years beneath the western sun. Her dark blonde hair, which had been neatly pinned that morning, now escaped in rebellious wisps around her face. "You won't beat me," she told the wagon firmly, as if her determination alone could fix the broken axle. Mary had been on her way to San Pedro, a small but growing town in western Kansas, where she planned to open a millinery shop. After her father's passing 3 months prior, there had been nothing to keep her in Topeka. The family home had been sold to pay his debts, and with her modest inheritance and her skill with needle and thread, she decided to make a fresh start somewhere her reputation wouldn't be shadowed by her father's gambling problems. She adjusted her position, lying flat on her back to get a better look at the damage. The axle hadn't completely broken through, but the crack was significant enough that continuing her journey without repairs would be foolhardy at best, suicidal at worst. She had tools her father had insisted she learn basic repairs before setting out alone, but this particular problem required strength she simply didn't possess. "Miss, I don't mean to intrude, but that axle looks mighty unfriendly." The deep voice startled her so badly that Mary jolted upward, banging her forehead against the underside of the wagon. Stars danced before her eyes as she scrambled out from beneath the vehicle, clutching her throbbing head. "I apologize for frightening you, madam." The voice belonged to a tall man astride a dappled gray horse. His face was partly shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he had a strong jaw covered in stubble that suggested several days without a razor. His clothes were trail-worn but clean enough, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-browned forearms, denims, and scuffed boots with spurs that gleamed silver in the sunlight. "You didn't frighten me," Mary lied, straightening her spine and dropping her hand from her forehead. "I was simply concentrating." A smile quirked at the corner of his mouth. "Of course." He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Ryder Flannigan. I was heading to San Pedro when I spotted your wagon. Looks like you've got yourself in a predicament." Mary sized him up, years of her father's warnings about strangers ringing in her ears. But there was something about his direct gaze that suggested honesty, and besides, she was in no position to refuse help. "Mary Beth." "Mary Beth Blackburn," she replied, then gestured to the wagon. "As you can see, I've had a bit of trouble." Ryder knelt to examine the damage, whistling low. "That's more than a bit, Miss Blackburn. You were trying to fix this by yourself." "I'm perfectly capable," she said defensively. "I've no doubt about your capabilities," he responded, his voice neutral. "But there are some jobs where 2 hands are better than 1. "I have 2 hands," Mary retorted, holding them up as evidence. His laugh was unexpected and warm like summer honey. "I meant 2 pairs. This is a 2-person job at minimum." He stood and dusted his hands on his trousers. "If you'll allow me, I'd be happy to help." Mary hesitated, glancing at the sun's position. It was past midday already. If she refused his help, she'd likely be camping beside her broken wagon tonight, alone on the open prairie. The thought sent a shiver down her spine despite the heat. "Very well, Mr. Flannigan. I accept your assistance," though I insist on working alongside you rather than sitting idly by." "Wouldn't have it any other way," he nodded, already rolling up his sleeves further. "And please call me Ryder." "Then you must call me Mary," she replied, surprising herself with the informal offer. For the next hour they worked together in the heat. Ryder proved to be both skilled and patient, showing Mary how to brace the wagon properly before jacking it up high enough to remove the damaged wheel. He explained each step as they went, treating her not as a helpless woman but as a competent partner who simply needed instruction. "You're handy with tools," he observed as she deftly removed a bolt he'd loosened. "Not many ladies of my acquaintance would know which end of a wrench to hold." "My father insisted I learn," she said, wiping sweat from her brow again. "He said a woman traveling alone should know how to care for her own transportation." "Smart man," Ryder commented, grunting as he worked on the damaged axle. "You've been traveling alone long." Mary stiffened. "Is that disapproval I hear?" "Not at all." He paused his work to look at her directly. "Just concern. The prairie can be dangerous, especially for a solitary traveler." "I'm well aware of the risks," she said, her voice softening slightly. "But sometimes life doesn't leave us many choices." Ryder nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know that feeling well enough." He returned to his work, falling silent for a while. As they continued repairing the wagon, Mary found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. His hands were strong but worked with surprising gentleness. There were scars across his knuckles and a particularly noticeable one that traced from his right wrist up under his sleeve. A man who'd seen his share of trouble, she guessed. "You mentioned San Pedro," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Is that your home?" "Not yet," he replied, securing the repaired axle with a grunt of effort. "But it might be soon. I've been offered a position as deputy there." "Deputy?" Mary couldn't hide her surprise. "You're a lawman going to be," he corrected. "I've ridden with a couple of marshals before, tracked some bounties in my younger days. Sheriff Taylor needs someone reliable who knows the territory." He glanced at her. "What takes you to San Pedro, if you don't mind my asking?" Mary passed him a tool before answering. "I'm going to open a shop. Hats primarily, though I can turn my hand to dressmaking as well. A milliner." His eyebrows rose appreciatively. San Pedro could use someone with those skills. Town's growing faster than spring weeds, so I've heard. That's why I chose it. She didn't mention her father's debts or her need for a fresh start. Some things were best kept private, at least until she knew him better. The thought gave her pause. Why was she considering knowing him better? He was simply a kind stranger helping her with her wagon. Once the repairs were complete, they'd go their separate ways. As if reading her thoughts, Ryder asked, "How much farther do you plan to travel today?" Mary glanced at the sun, now visibly descending toward the western horizon. "I had hoped to reach the Willow Creek crossing by nightfall, but that seems unlikely now." "It's another 15 miles at least," Ryder confirmed. "And this trail gets treacherous after dark. There's a decent camping spot about a mile ahead, near a small spring. If you're amenable, we could make camp there and continue on in the morning." Mary stiffened again, her face carefully neutral. "Mr. Flannigan, while I appreciate your assistance with my wagon, I couldn't possibly— I meant separate camps," he clarified quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. "On opposite sides of the spring. I just thought, safety in numbers, but I understand if you'd prefer to travel alone." She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but found only honest concern. "Very well," she said finally. "Separate camps it is. But I warn you, Mr. Flannigan, I sleep with a shotgun." His laugh brightened the air between them. "I'd think less of you if you didn't, Miss Blackburn." With the wheel reattached and the axle reinforced with metal strips from Ryder's own supplies, They set off just as the sun was beginning to paint the western sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Mary drove her wagon while Ryder rode alongside on his gray horse, which he'd introduced as Baron. "He thinks he's nobility," Ryder had explained with affection, patting the horse's neck. "Acts like it, too." True to his word, the camping spot was ideal, a small clearing near a bubbling spring, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. They worked with efficient coordination, as if they'd made camp together dozens of times before. Ryder gathered firewood while Mary unpacked her cooking supplies. They agreed to share a meal, with Mary contributing cornmeal and bacon while Ryder added fresh rabbit he'd caught earlier that day. As darkness fell completely, they sat on opposite sides of the small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. The rabbit and cornmeal cakes had been delicious, and Mary found herself more relaxed than she'd been in months. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" Ryder asked, scraping the last bit of food from his plate. "My mother taught me," Mary answered, a soft smile playing on her lips as memories surfaced. "She said a woman should know how to make something wonderful out of nearly nothing. It was a necessary skill in our household." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Mary's smile faded. "She died when I was 16, influenza." "I'm sorry," Ryder said quietly. "Losing parents is never easy, no matter how old you are." Something in his tone made Mary look at him more closely. "You speak from experience." He nodded, setting his plate aside. "Lost my father to a mining accident when I was 12. Mother lasted another 5 years before her heart gave out." He stared into the fire. "Been on my own since I was 17. "That's very young," Mary said softly. "Old enough in these parts," Ryder shrugged. "I found work on cattle drives, learned to shoot straight and ride hard. It was a good education for a boy with nothing but his horse and his wits." As the night deepened around them, they continued to talk. Mary learned that Ryder had indeed worked as a bounty hunter for several years before deciding he wanted something more stable, more respectable. He'd been recommended to Sheriff Taylor by a federal marshal who'd been impressed with Ryder's tracking skills and level head. In turn, Mary told him about growing up in Topeka, how she'd apprenticed with a milliner there, and discovered her talent for creating beautiful things from scraps of fabric, feathers, and ribbon. She even confessed, somewhat to her own surprise, about her father's gambling problem and how it had left her nearly destitute upon his death. "So this move to San Pedro," Ryder said thoughtfully, "it's more than just a business opportunity for you." "It's a chance to be judged on my own merits," Mary agreed, her voice quiet but firm. "In Topeka, I was always Thomas Blackburn's daughter. The whispers followed me everywhere." Ryder nodded his understanding. "A fresh start can be a powerful thing." The conversation eventually wound down as fatigue set in. True to their agreement, they made separate sleeping arrangements, Mary in her wagon and Ryder beneath the stars near the hitching post where Baron stood. As Mary settled into her bedroll, shotgun within arm's reach as promised, she found herself thinking about the day's events. What had started as a disaster had somehow transformed into what? Not quite an adventure, but certainly something unexpected. Ryder Flannigan was unlike any man she'd met before, direct yet respectful, capable yet unassuming. She drifted off to sleep with the sound of prairie wind in the cottonwoods and the occasional soft nickering of horses in her ears. Morning arrived with dew-soaked grass and birdsong. Mary awoke to the smell of coffee brewing and emerged from her wagon to find Ryder already up, tending a small fire. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd already visited the spring to wash. "Good morning," he greeted, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. "Slept well?" "Better than expected," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed to fully wake up. "Thank you for this. Least I could do for the fine dinner you provided." He gestured to a small pan where bacon sizzled. "I hope you don't mind. I thought we could use a hearty breakfast before hitting the trail again." They ate quickly, eager to make progress while the day was still cool. As they packed up their respective camps, Mary found herself watching Ryder again, noting the efficient way he moved, the care he took with his horse, the quiet competence in everything he did. By the time the sun had fully risen, they were back on the trail, Ryder once again riding alongside her wagon. The conversation flowed easily between them as the miles passed, touching on everything from the weather to politics to books they'd read. Mary was surprised to discover that Ryder was remarkably well-read for a man who'd spent most of his life on the move. "My mother insisted," he explained when she commented on it. "Said just because we lived in the West didn't mean we had to be uncivilized. She taught me my letters using the Bible and whatever other books she could get her hands on." "She sounds wonderful," Mary said sincerely. She was. His smile was tinged with sadness. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said a woman with a strong mind was worth 10 times her weight in gold." The compliment warmed Mary in ways she hadn't expected. They reached Willow Creek by midday, where they stopped to rest the horses and eat a light meal. The creek was running high from recent rains, but the crossing looked manageable. "We should make San Pedro by tomorrow afternoon if we keep this pace," Ryder said as they prepared to continue their journey. "Barring any more broken wagon wheels, of course." "You'll never let me forget that, will you?" Mary asked, but there was no real irritation in her voice. "Not likely," he grinned, mounting Barron with practiced ease. "It's not every day I come across a determined woman lying under a wagon in the middle of nowhere. Most men would have considered it improper." "I'm not most men, Miss Blackburn." His eyes met hers, suddenly serious. "And I don't think you're most women either." The intensity of his gaze sent an unexpected shiver through Mary. She looked away first, busying herself with checking the horses' harnesses. The rest of the day passed pleasantly as they continued their journey. The landscape gradually changed from flat prairie to rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and the occasional stand of oak. By late afternoon, storm clouds were gathering on the western horizon, promising rain before night fell. "We should look for shelter," Ryder suggested, eyeing the darkening sky with concern. "That doesn't look like a gentle shower coming our way." Mary nodded her agreement. "Is there anywhere suitable nearby?" "There's an old way station about 3 miles ahead," he replied. "It's been abandoned for a few years, but the roof was still sound last time I passed through." They pushed on, urging the horses to a faster pace as thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of a significant storm. Mary could feel the first scattered droplets when the way station finally came into view, a sturdy log structure with a covered area for horses and wagons. They reached it just as the heavens opened in earnest. Ryder helped Mary secure her wagon under the shelter while the rain drummed on the roof above them. Together, they unhitched the horses and led them into the crude stable attached to the main building. "Perfect timing," Ryder shouted over a crash of thunder as they dashed from the stable to the way station's main door. They burst inside, both of them soaked despite the short distance. The interior was dusty, but intact, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 benches, and a platform that had once served as a bed in one corner. The windows were shuttered against the storm, leaving the space dim and shadowy. "Not exactly the Palmer house," Ryder commented wryly, shaking water from his hat before setting it aside. "It's dry and has a fireplace," Mary replied, wringing water from her skirt. "That makes it a palace at the moment." Ryder set about building a fire while Mary retrieved supplies from her wagon, darting through the rain with a canvas tarp held over her head. Soon, the fireplace was crackling with warmth, casting a golden glow throughout the small room. They hung their wet outer garments near the fire to dry and set about preparing a simple meal from their remaining provisions. The storm showed no signs of abating as they ate their dinner, lightning illuminating the cracks in the shutters while thunder rattled the very foundations of the building. Despite the ferocity outside, Mary found herself feeling surprisingly content within the snug shelter, with good food in her stomach and Ryder's quiet company across the table. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, after a particularly loud thunderclap had faded. Mary smiled, tracing patterns in the wood grain of the table with her fingertip. "I was just thinking how strange life can be. 3 days ago I was alone on the trail, convinced I needed no one's help. Now here I am, sharing shelter with a man I barely know, yet somehow—" "Somehow what?" Ryder prompted when she trailed off. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Somehow feeling as if I've known you much longer." The firelight played across his features, softening the angles of his face. "I know exactly what you mean." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the storm's continued rage and the occasional pop from the fire. Eventually, they addressed the sleeping arrangements. With only one bed platform and the floor, they agreed that Mary would take the platform while Ryder would make do with his bedroll near the fire. As Mary settled onto the platform, wrapped in her own blankets, she watched Ryder stoke the fire one last time before stretching out on his bedroll. The domesticity of the scene struck her forcefully, the two of them sharing this space, preparing for sleep as if they'd done so 100 times before. It was both alarming and oddly comforting. "Good night, Mary," Ryder's voice came softly through the dimness. "Good night, Ryder," she replied, turning onto her side to watch the play of firelight on the ceiling beams. Sleep came more slowly than the previous night, her mind filled with questions about the man sleeping just a few feet away and the strange turn her journey had taken. Morning brought clear skies and birdsong. Mary awoke to find Ryder already up and outside, tending to the horses. She quickly made herself presentable before joining him, breathing deeply of the fresh, rain-washed air. "The storm's passed completely," Ryder informed her, pausing in his work of brushing Baron's coat. "But the trail will be muddy. We'll need to take it slow today." Mary nodded, helping him prepare for departure. They worked together with the same easy coordination they'd developed over the past 2 days, speaking little but understanding much. By mid-morning, they were back on the trail, though their progress was indeed slowed by the mud that sucked at the wagon wheels and made the horses work harder. "Tell me more about San Pedro," Mary requested as they navigated a particularly challenging stretch. "What sort of place is it really? I've only heard second-hand accounts." Ryder shifted in his saddle, considering. "It's a town that's still finding itself, I'd say. Started as a cattle shipping point about 10 years ago when the railroad came through, but it's grown beyond that now. There's a proper school, 3 churches competing for souls, 2 hotels and businesses of all sorts. Sheriff Taylor's kept it more orderly than most frontier towns its size. And the people, a mix like anywhere, mostly good folk trying to build something lasting. Some rougher elements, especially when the cattle drives come through, but nothing the sheriff and I can't handle." He glanced at her. "You'll find customers there if that's your concern. The women of San Pedro are just as eager for fashion as ladies anywhere else." "That's reassuring," Mary admitted. "And housing, is it difficult to secure?" "Depends on what you're looking for," Ryder replied. "There are rooms above some of the businesses that can be rented." A few boarding houses, too. Eventually, you might want something more permanent. The conversation turned to practical matters of establishing a business in a new town: licenses, suppliers, competition. Ryder proved knowledgeable about San Pedro's commercial landscape, offering insights that Mary found genuinely helpful. By the time they stopped for a midday rest, she had a much clearer picture of what awaited her. As they continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape began to show more signs of settlement: fenced pastures, the occasional distant farmhouse, roads that branched off from the main trail. They passed other travelers now and then, mostly farmers in wagons or solitary riders who tipped their hats in greeting. "We're getting close," Ryder noted as they crested a hill in the late afternoon. "See that smudge of smoke on the horizon? That's San Pedro." Mary shaded her eyes, looking where he pointed. Indeed, there was a faint gray haze against the blue sky, still far distant but unmistakable. For the first time since leaving Topeka, she felt a flutter of real nervousness. Soon, she would be attempting to establish herself in a strange town among people who knew nothing about her. The challenge suddenly seemed enormous. "Having second thoughts?" Ryder asked perceptively, noticing her expression. "Not exactly second thoughts," Mary replied carefully. "More like first fears." His smile was gentle. "That's natural enough, but if it helps, I think you'll do fine in San Pedro. You've got skill and determination. That's a powerful combination." "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by his confidence. "I suppose we'll find out soon enough." They traveled until sunset, making camp one last time before reaching town. This final night on the trail felt different, somehow tinged with an awareness that their journey together was nearing its end. As they sat by the campfire after dinner, the conversation turned reflective. "I never properly thanked you," Mary said suddenly. "Not just for helping with the wagon, but for everything since." Ryder looked up from the stick he'd been whittling. "No thanks necessary. I was heading this way regardless." "Still, you could have simply fixed my wagon and continued on your way. You didn't have to escort me all this distance." He was quiet for a moment, the firelight dancing across his features. "Maybe I wanted to." The simple statement hung in the air between them, carrying weight that neither seemed ready to fully acknowledge. "Well, I'm grateful nonetheless," Mary finally said, her voice softer than she'd intended. Ryder nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his whittling. "What will you do first when we reach San Pedro tomorrow?" Grateful for the shift to practical matters, Mary outlined her plans: find accommodations, scout locations for her shop, visit the bank to establish an account. Ryder offered suggestions and names of people who might be helpful. The conversation continued until the fire burned low and yawns began to punctuate their words. As they prepared for sleep, Mary found herself reluctant to retreat to her wagon. Something about this final night seemed to demand acknowledgement, though she wasn't entirely sure what form that should take. "Ryder," she began, standing awkwardly by the wagon step. He looked up from where he was spreading his bedroll. "Yes." Words failed her. What could she say that wouldn't sound overly sentimental or, worse, presumptuous? They had known each other only 3 days after all. "Sleep well," she finally managed. "And thank you again for the company." His smile in the dying firelight made her heart beat faster. "The pleasure's been mine, Mary Beth Blackburn. Truly." Morning dawned clear and bright, their last on the trail. They broke camp efficiently, both aware that by afternoon they would be in San Pedro. Conversation was sparse as they traveled, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. As predicted, they reached the outskirts of San Pedro shortly after midday. The town materialized gradually, first scattered homesteads, then more closely spaced buildings, until they were traveling down a proper street with boardwalks on either side. San Pedro was larger than Mary had expected, with a bustling main street lined with businesses of all sorts. People moved purposefully along the boardwalks or gathered in conversational clusters. Wagons and riders navigated the muddy thoroughfare, creating a constant flow of activity. "Sheriff's office is down this way," Ryder indicated, pointing toward a solid-looking building with a sign proclaiming it the domain of law and order. "I should report in as soon as possible." Mary nodded, suddenly feeling adrift. Their journey was ending. Real life was reasserting itself. "Of course, you've been expected." They continued down the main street until they reached the sheriff's office. Ryder dismounted, then came around to Mary's wagon. "The Jenkins boarding house is just 2 blocks that way," he said, pointing down a side street. "Mrs. Jenkins is fair with her rates and keeps a clean house. Tell her I sent you." "I will," Mary promised, acutely aware that this was goodbye, at least for now. "Good luck with Sheriff Taylor." Ryder hesitated, one hand on the wagon wheel. "Mary, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "I hope you'll let me call on you once you're settled." Relief and pleasure flooded through her. "I'd like that very much." His smile brightened his entire face. "Good, that's good." He stepped back, tipping his hat. "Until then, Miss Blackburn." "Until then, Mr. Flannigan," she replied, unable to suppress her own smile as she flicked the reins and set the wagon in motion again. Mary found the Jenkins boarding house exactly where Ryder had indicated. It was a large 2-story structure with a wide porch and clean windows, respectable without being pretentious. Mrs. Jenkins herself answered the door, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that took Mary's measure in an instant. "Ryder Flannigan sent you, did he?" she asked after Mary had introduced herself and explained her situation. "Well, that's recommendation enough for me. I've got a room on the 2nd floor that might suit you, small, but it has its own wash basin and a decent view of the street." The room proved to be exactly as described, and the weekly rate was reasonable. Mary agreed to take it immediately, relieved to have secured proper accommodations so quickly. Mrs. Jenkins helped her carry in her personal belongings, chatting all the while about San Pedro and its inhabitants. "You're a milliner, you say? Well, that's fortuitous timing. Mrs. Paulson just closed her shop last month when her husband's health took him back east. Left a gap in the market, she did. The ladies of San Pedro have been making do with mail orders since then, and you know how unsatisfactory that can be." By evening, Mary had not only secured her room but also received a thorough education on San Pedro's social landscape from her garrulous landlady. She learned which merchants were fair, which church hosted the most influential congregation, and which doctor to call in case of illness. Mrs. Jenkins seemed to know everyone's business and was more than happy to share her knowledge. After a surprisingly good dinner in the boarding house's dining room, where she met several other residents, Mary retired to her room. Sitting by the window that overlooked the now quiet street, she contemplated the dramatic shift her life had taken in just a few days. From solitary traveler to what? A woman with prospects, certainly. A woman with a potential friend in Ryder Flannigan, at the very least. The thought of Ryder brought a smile to her face. She wondered how his meeting with Sheriff Taylor had gone, whether he was settled yet, if he was looking out a window somewhere in San Pedro thinking of her as she was thinking of him. "Don't be fanciful," she chided herself softly. "The man helped you with your wagon and escorted you to town. That doesn't mean anything beyond common decency." But even as she prepared for bed, Mary couldn't quite convince herself that the connection between them was so easily dismissed. The next week passed in a flurry of activity as Mary established herself in San Pedro. She secured a small storefront on a side street just off the main thoroughfare, not the prime location she might have wished for, but affordable and with good natural light for her work. The previous tenant had been a watchmaker, and the space required considerable cleaning and rearranging to suit her purposes, but Mary tackled the task with determination. She also placed orders with suppliers in Kansas City for materials she couldn't source locally, opened an account at the San Pedro bank, and began introducing herself to potential customers. The women of San Pedro were indeed eager for a local milliner, and Mary soon had several commissions for both new hats and renovations of existing ones. Throughout this busy time, she saw nothing of Ryder Flannigan. She heard about him, of course. Mrs. Jenkins and the other boarding house residents were full of town gossip, and the arrival of the new deputy was notable news. Reportedly, he had settled into his duties with quiet competence, already earning respect for his fair handling of a dispute between a shopkeeper and a drunken cowboy. Mary told herself she wasn't disappointed by his absence. After all, he was establishing himself in a new position just as she was establishing her business. It was natural that they would both be preoccupied. Still, each time the bell above her shop door jingled, she couldn't help glancing up with a flutter of anticipation, only to experience a small pang of letdown when the visitor proved to be someone else. On the afternoon of her 8th day in San Pedro, Mary was arranging her front window display when the bell jingled. She turned, a polite greeting ready on her lips, only to find Ryder Flannigan standing just inside the door, hat in hand. He wore a deputy's star on his vest now, the silver badge catching the light as he shifted his weight. "Miss Blackburn," he said, his voice as warm as she remembered, "your shop looks mighty fine." Mary smoothed her apron, suddenly conscious of the bits of thread clinging to her skirt and the pencil she'd tucked behind her ear. "Deputy Flannigan, what a pleasant surprise. I've been meaning to call sooner," he said, taking a step further into the shop. "But duties kept me busy these first days." "Of course," she nodded, gesturing for him to come in properly. "I've heard you're making quite an impression already." A slight flush colored his cheeks. "People talk too much in small towns." "They do indeed," Mary agreed with a smile. "Mrs. Jenkins has been particularly informative." Ryder grimaced. "That woman knows everything about everyone. I swear she has spies on every street corner." "She's been very kind to me," Mary defended, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "And her information is generally accurate, if somewhat embellished." "Fair enough," he conceded, glancing around the shop with genuine interest. "You've accomplished a lot in a short time. This place was a dusty mess when old Mr. Finch moved out." "It's still a work in progress," Mary said, following his gaze around the small but increasingly orderly space. "But it's beginning to feel like mine." Ryder nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's important, having something of your own." There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Ryder cleared his throat. "The reason I stopped by, well, one reason was to invite you to dinner tomorrow evening. The hotel restaurant is the best in town, and I thought—" "That is, if you're not otherwise engaged." "I'd be delighted," Mary said quickly, saving him from his uncharacteristic awkwardness. "What time shall I expect you?" Relief and pleasure crossed his features. 6 o'clock. I'll call for you at the boarding house." 6 is perfect," she confirmed, her heart beating a little faster at the prospect. Ryder lingered a moment longer, seeming reluctant to leave now that his invitation had been accepted. "How are you finding San Pedro so far? Is it meeting your expectations?" "It's exceeding them, actually," Mary replied honestly. The people have been welcoming, and there seems to be a genuine need for my services. Mrs. Paulson's departure created an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. I'm glad to hear it, Ryder said sincerely. You deserve success. The simple statement, delivered with such evident belief, warmed Mary through. Thank you. That means a great deal. Another silence fell, this one decidedly more charged than the last. Ryder broke it first, settling his hat back on his head. I should let you get back to your work. Until tomorrow, then. Until tomorrow, Mary echoed, watching as he tipped his hat and departed, the bell jingling cheerfully with his exit. For the remainder of the day, Mary found it difficult to concentrate on her tasks. Her mind kept returning to Ryder's visit, replaying their conversation and anticipating their dinner engagement. It had been a long time since she'd felt this particular kind of nervous excitement, not since, before her father's gambling had cast a shadow over their family name, and made her an object of pity or disdain among Topeka's eligible bachelors. She chided herself for such schoolgirlish reactions. It was just dinner, after all. A friendly gesture from someone who had helped her on the journey to San Pedro. Nothing more. But as she closed up shop that evening and walked back to the boarding house, Mary couldn't quite convince herself that her feelings were so straightforward. There was something about Ryder Flannigan that had captured her interest from their very first meeting, something beyond his handsome face and capable hands. A quality of character, perhaps, that resonated with her own. The next evening found Mary scrutinizing her reflection with unusual care. She had chosen her best dress for the occasion, a deep blue poplin with minimal bustle and tasteful trim that complemented her fair coloring. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, with a few curls left free to soften the effect. She wore no jewelry except a small cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Jenkins commented when Mary descended the stairs precisely at 6 o'clock. "Our deputy won't know what hit him. It's just a friendly dinner, Mrs. Jenkins," Mary protested, though she couldn't prevent a blush from rising to her cheeks. The landlady's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. "Of course it is. And here he comes now, right on time." Indeed, through the front window, Mary could see Ryder approaching the boarding house. He was dressed in what was clearly his best suit, slightly out of fashion but well maintained, with a crisp white shirt and polished boots. His hair was neatly combed and he had shaved carefully, his jaw smooth in the early evening light. Mrs. Jenkins bustled to open the door before he could knock. "Deputy Flannigan, right on time. Miss Blackburn is ready for you." Ryder stepped into the foyer, removing his hat as he did so. His eyes found Mary immediately, and the appreciation in his gaze sent a flutter through her stomach. "Miss Blackburn," he said, his voice slightly deeper than usual. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Mary replied, pleased by his reaction. "You're looking quite handsome yourself, Mrs. Jenkins beamed at them both like a matchmaking fairy godmother. "Now don't you two worry about the time. My door is never locked before 11 and I'm a heavy sleeper after that." "Mrs. Jenkins," Mary exclaimed, mortified. Ryder coughed, clearly suppressing laughter. "We'll bear that in mind, madam. Shall we, Miss Blackburn?" He offered his arm. Grateful for the escape, Mary placed her hand on his arm and allowed him to lead her out into the pleasant evening air. "I apologize for Mrs. Jenkins," she said as they made their way down the street. "She means well, but propriety isn't always her strong suit." "No apology needed," Ryder assured her, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "She reminds me of my Aunt Beatrice, says exactly what's on her mind and assumes everyone appreciates her honesty." The comparison was so apt that Mary laughed out loud. "Exactly. Though I must admit, her directness is refreshing after Topeka's layers of social pretense." They continued in this easy manner as they walked to the hotel, discussing the characters they'd encountered in San Pedro and sharing anecdotes from their first week in town. By the time they reached the hotel restaurant, Mary felt completely at ease in Ryder's company once again, the initial nervousness having melted away. The restaurant was the most elegant establishment in San Pedro, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented the frontier town's aspirations toward civilization. White tablecloths, proper silverware, and a menu that went beyond the standard fare of the local saloons all signaled its pretensions to refinement. The maitre d' recognized Ryder immediately, greeting him with respect and leading them to a table near a window that overlooked the town's small park. Sheriff Taylor recommended this place, Ryder explained as they were seated. Said it's the only restaurant in town where the food doesn't fight back. Mary smiled at the description. And how are you finding your work with the sheriff? Better than I expected, honestly, Ryder replied, his expression thoughtful. Taylor's a good man, fair-minded and respected. He's teaching me the administrative side of law enforcement, which was never my strong suit during my bounty hunting days. I imagine there's quite a difference between tracking fugitives and keeping the peace in a growing town. There is, he agreed, though both require an understanding of human nature. People are people, whether they're on the run or just trying to live their lives. The conversation paused as the waiter took their orders. Once he had departed, Mary leaned forward slightly. Do you miss it? The freedom of your former life? Ryder considered the question carefully before answering. Parts of it, yes. There's nothing quite like being out on the open prairie, answerable only to yourself and the sky above. But there were lonely times, too. His eyes met hers directly. And danger that wasn't always worth the reward. The sincerity in his voice touched Mary deeply. I understand that feeling. The past few years in Topeka, they were difficult in different ways. The freedom I have now to build something of my own without the shadow of my father's reputation, it's worth the uncertainty of starting over. To new beginnings, then, Ryder proposed, raising his water glass in a toast. To new beginnings, Mary echoed, touching her glass to his. The dinner that followed was one of the most enjoyable Mary could remember. The food was indeed excellent by frontier standards, but it was the company that made the evening special. Ryder proved to be as good a conversationalist over fine china as he had been around a campfire. They discussed books they had read, places they had visited or hoped to see someday, dreams they had harbored since childhood. The hours passed quickly, marked by laughter, thoughtful exchanges, and moments of comfortable silence. As they finished their dessert, a surprisingly delicate apple tart, Ryder looked at Mary with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Would you care for a walk before I escort you home? The evening still mild. I'd like that very much, Mary replied, suddenly reluctant for their time together to end. They strolled through San Pedro's small park, where a few other couples were similarly enjoying the pleasant night air. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the manicured paths and newly planted trees that would someday provide ample shade. The town council has big plans for this park, Ryder commented as they walked. Bandstand, fountain, proper gardens. Sheriff Taylor says they're determined to make San Pedro the jewel of western Kansas. It's ambitious, Mary observed, but I like that spirit. Building something lasting takes vision. And patience, Ryder added, and people willing to put down roots. There was a question in his last statement, one that Mary chose to address directly. I intend to put down roots here if the town will have me. My shop is already showing promise and I find I like the community. I'm glad to hear it, Ryder said, his relief evident. I've been thinking about roots myself lately. Never much considered them before. They had stopped walking, standing now beneath a young oak tree that someday would tower over the park. In the moonlight, Ryder's eyes were shadows, but Mary could feel the intensity of his gaze. What changed? She asked softly. He took a small step closer. I met a woman trying to fix a wagon alone on the prairie. Stubborn, capable woman who made me think that maybe wandering isn't the only way to live a worthwhile life. Mary's breath caught in her throat. That sounds like a remarkable woman. She is, Ryder agreed, his voice dropping lower. Most remarkable woman I've ever met. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Ryder raised his hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "May I?" he asked, his intention clear. In answer, Mary closed the small distance between them, her eyes fluttering closed as their lips met. The kiss was tender, a question and an answer all at once. Ryder's hand cradled her face with exquisite care, as if she were something precious he feared might break. When they parted, Mary's heart was racing, her cheeks flushed with more than the mild evening air. That was long overdue, Ryder finished for her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. At least from my perspective. Mary laughed softly. I was going to say wonderful, but your description works too. He captured her hand in his, bringing it to his lips for a kiss that sent another shiver through her. I should get you back to Mrs. Jenkins before she sends out a search party. Probably wise, Mary agreed reluctantly. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, their conversation now punctuated by comfortable silences and meaningful glances. At the front door, Ryder kissed her again, this time with a warmth that promised much more. "When can I see you again?" he asked as they finally separated. "Tomorrow," Mary suggested, throwing propriety to the wind. "You could come by the shop after closing. I could make us dinner." His smile was answer enough, but he added, "I'll be there." 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock, she confirmed, reluctantly releasing his hand as she opened the door. Mrs. Jenkins was nowhere to be seen, but Mary could have sworn she heard a satisfied HMPH from the vicinity of the parlor as she made her way upstairs. The landlady's intuition was proving remarkably accurate. In her room, Mary sat by the window for a long time, replaying the evening in her mind. The dinner, the conversation, the kiss. Especially the kiss. She had been kissed before, of course, but never with such genuine feeling behind it. Never in a way that made her feel as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis, revealing new possibilities she hadn't dared to consider. "Don't rush ahead of yourself," she cautioned her reflection in the small mirror on her dresser. "It's only been a week since you arrived in San Pedro. A proper courtship takes time." But even as she prepared for bed, Mary couldn't help wondering if perhaps their journey together had been the beginning of that courtship, 4 days on the trail, sharing meals and conversation and the vast prairie sky. Perhaps they had already laid the foundation for something more enduring than either of them had anticipated. The following weeks saw Mary and Ryder settling into a comfortable rhythm. He would stop by her shop when his duties allowed, sometimes just for a few minutes to say hello, other times helping her with small repairs or deliveries. They dined together several times a week, alternating between meals at the hotel restaurant and simpler fare that Mary prepared in the small kitchen at the back of her shop. On Sundays, they attended church together, drawing knowing smiles from San Pedro's residents, who had quickly identified them as a courting couple. Mary's business flourished as word spread about her skill with needle and thread. Women from surrounding farms and ranches began to make special trips into town to visit Miss Blackburn's millinery, and she soon had enough custom work to justify hiring a young assistant, 16-year-old Betsy Wilson, who showed remarkable aptitude for the craft. Ryder, too, was establishing himself in the community. His fair but firm approach to law enforcement earned him respect from even the rowdier elements in town. Sheriff Taylor increasingly delegated responsibility to him, a sign of growing trust that did not go unnoticed by San Pedro's citizens. As summer gave way to autumn, their relationship deepened. Mary learned about Ryder's years as a bounty hunter, the loneliness of the trail, the moral complexities of the work, the skills he had developed that now served him well as a lawman. In turn, she shared more about her life in Topeka, her mother's early influence on her love of creating beautiful things, her father's gradual descent into gambling and debt, her own determination to forge a different path. One crisp October evening, as they walked along the riverbank outside town, Ryder broached a subject they had danced around but never directly addressed. "I've been thinking," he began, his breath visible in the cool air, "about the future." Mary's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her voice steady. "What about it?" Ryder stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun gilded his features, highlighting the earnestness in his expression. "I've never been much for planning ahead. Always lived day to day, taking whatever came my way, but lately—" He took both her hands in his touch warm against the evening chill. "Lately, I find myself thinking about tomorrow and the day after and the year after that. And in every version of that future, you're there, Mary. Right beside me." Mary's throat tightened with emotion. "I see you in my future too, Ryder, every day, do you think?" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you consider making that official? Not immediately, perhaps, but someday soon." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Mary needed the words spoken clearly. No room for misunderstanding. Ryder's smile was tender as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, marry Beth Blackburn. If you'll build that future with me, here in San Pedro." He opened the box to reveal a ring not elaborate or ostentatious, but beautifully crafted, with a small diamond that caught the last rays of sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "The one thing of value I've carried with me all these years. She told me to give it only to a woman worthy of it, a woman with strength and grace and a mind of her own." Tears filled Mary's eyes as she looked from the ring to Ryder's face. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, I'll marry you, Ryder Flannigan." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that left them both breathless. When they finally separated, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I never expected this, you know. When I found you under that wagon, cursing that broken axle." Mary laughed through her happy tears. "Neither did I, but I'm so glad you stopped." "Best decision I ever made," Ryder declared, kissing her again. "Two hands really are better than one, especially when they're yours and mine together." The news of their engagement spread quickly through San Pedro, met with universal approval, and not a small amount of "I told you so" from Mrs. Jenkins, who claimed credit for fostering their romance from the beginning. Plans for a December wedding began to take shape, with the entire town seeming to take a proprietary interest in the arrangements. As the wedding date approached, Mary divided her time between her growing business and preparations for her new life with Ryder. They had decided to purchase a small house on the edge of town, modest but solid, with room for expansion as their family grew. The thought of children, of building a true home with Ryder, filled Mary with a contentment she had never imagined possible when she'd set out from Topeka just months earlier. The week before the wedding brought an unexpected snowfall, blanketing San Pedro in white and lending a fairy tale quality to the town. Mary stood in her shop, putting the finishing touches on her wedding bonnet when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, expecting to see Betsy returning from lunch, but instead found Sheriff Taylor, his expression grave. "Miss Blackburn," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Mary's heart froze. There was only one reason the sheriff would come to her shop with such a serious demeanor. "Is it Ryder? Has something happened?" "There's been an incident," Taylor confirmed, his voice gentle but direct. "Deputy Flannigan was shot while attempting to prevent a bank robbery." The room seemed to tilt around her. Is he? "He's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly. "But wounded. Doc Miller is with him now at the clinic. I came to fetch you right away." Mary didn't remember hanging up her apron or locking the shop door. Her next clear memory was entering Doc Miller's small clinic, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the sheriff's continued reassurances. Ryder lay on a narrow bed in a back room, his face pale against the white sheets. His shirt had been removed, revealing bandages wrapped around his left shoulder and upper chest. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. "He's lost blood, but the bullet went clean through," Doc Miller explained quietly. "Missed any vital organs. With proper rest and care, he should make a full recovery." Mary's legs nearly gave way with relief. She sank into the chair beside Ryder's bed, taking his hand carefully in hers. "Thank God. He's sedated now," the doctor continued, "but he was asking for you before I gave him the laudanum. Seemed mighty concerned about the wedding." A laugh that was half sob escaped Mary's lips. That would be his priority. Sheriff Taylor provided the details as Mary maintained her vigil at Ryder's side. 3 men had attempted to rob the bank shortly after noon. Ryder had responded to the alarm, confronting them as they emerged with their ill-gotten gains. In the ensuing gunfight, he had managed to wound 1 robber and capture another, but had been shot by the 3rd, who had subsequently escaped. "He showed remarkable courage," Taylor concluded. "Saved the bank's money and probably several lives. Town council's already talking about a commendation." Mary nodded, her attention focused on Ryder's face, willing his eyes to open. As if in response to her silent plea, his eyelids flickered, then lifted slowly. "Mary." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I'm here," she assured him, squeezing his hand gently. "I'm right here, love." Relief flooded his features. "The wedding is still happening," she said firmly, "just as soon as you're well enough to stand beside me." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Might need a little help standing." "Then we'll both help you," Sheriff Taylor interjected from the doorway. "No one's postponing this wedding on my watch. Town's been looking forward to it for months." Doc Miller, returning with fresh bandages, added his own assurance. "The wound's clean and you're young and strong. A week of proper rest and you'll be well enough for a brief ceremony at least, though the honeymoon might need to be delayed a bit." Color returned to Ryder's cheeks at that, bringing a watery smile to Mary's face. If he could still blush at the doctor's implication, he truly was on the mend. The next week passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Mary divided her time between her shop, wedding preparations, and Ryder's bedside. The entire town rallied around them, bringing meals, offering assistance with the wedding arrangements, even taking shifts at the sheriff's office to allow Taylor more time to pursue the escaped bank robber. Ryder improved steadily, his natural vitality reasserting itself day by day. By the time their wedding day arrived, delayed only by 3 days from the original date, he was able to stand without assistance, though he still tired easily, and his left arm remained in a sling beneath his suit jacket. The ceremony took place in San Pedro's largest church, filled to capacity with townspeople who had taken the young couple into their hearts. Mary wore a gown of ivory silk that she had crafted herself, with a matching bonnet adorned with silk roses and a short veil. Despite his injury, Ryder cut a handsome figure in his new suit, standing tall and proud as Mary walked down the aisle toward him. "You are the most beautiful sight I have ever seen," he whispered as she reached his side. "And you are the bravest man I have ever known," she replied, her eyes shining with love and pride. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder's kiss was tender but thorough enough to elicit cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward, held in the hotel's dining room, stretched well into the evening, with toasts and well wishes from what seemed like every resident of San Pedro. As promised, they postponed their honeymoon, a planned trip to Denver that would wait until Ryder was fully recovered. Instead, they began their married life in the small house they had purchased, adapting to Ryder's temporary limitations with good humor and deepening affection. "Not exactly how I imagined our first weeks as husband and wife," Ryder commented one evening as Mary changed his bandages. His recovery was progressing well, but the wound still required daily care. "Perhaps not," Mary agreed, her touch gentle as she applied the salve Doc Miller had provided. "But we're together. That's what matters." Ryder captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have," she smiled, "but I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Mary Flannigan," he said solemnly, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, leaning forward to kiss him softly. "My brave, stubborn cowboy who insisted that two hands are better than one." "Best advice I ever gave," Ryder murmured against her lips, "though I had no idea where it would lead us." "To exactly where we're meant to be," Mary assured him, settling carefully beside him on their bed. "Together, building something lasting." As winter gave way to spring, both Ryder and Mary flourished in San Pedro. His shoulder healed completely, allowing him to return to full duties by February. The escaped bank robber was eventually captured by a U.S. Marshal in Colorado, bringing closure to the incident that had nearly cost Ryder his life. Mary's millinery business expanded to include a full dressmaking service, requiring larger premises and 2 additional assistants. Her reputation spread throughout the region, bringing customers from as far away as Dodge City and Hayes. In late spring, as the prairie burst into bloom around San Pedro, Mary shared news that brought their happiness full circle. "Ryder," she said one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it, love?" Mary took his hand, placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "By Christmas, there will be 3 of us." The wonder that bloomed on his face was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby, we're having a baby," she nodded, laughing as he pulled her into a careful embrace. "Doc Miller confirmed it yesterday. He says everything looks perfectly healthy." Ryder kissed her with tender passion, then drew back to gaze at her in awe. "A family, our own family." "Yes," Mary confirmed, her heart full to bursting. "Our very own family in our very own home in the town where we found each other." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about the future, their hopes for their child, plans for expanding their home, dreams they now shared. The prairie wind whispered through the young trees they had planted in their yard, carrying the promise of tomorrow. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ryder asked as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "When you were trying to fix that wagon alone?" "Often," Mary admitted, nestled against his side. "How frustrated I was, how determined to manage by myself, how suspicious when you offered help." "And now look at us," he marveled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. All because of a broken axle and my mother's advice about two hands being better than one. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, Mary said softly. I wish I could have known her. She would have loved you, Ryder assured her, his voice rough with emotion. Almost as much as I do. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars of evening winked to life above them. Beyond their porch, San Pedro settled into its nighttime rhythms, lamps being lit in windows, saloon pianos tinkling in the distance, the occasional laugh or call drifting on the gentle breeze. We've found our place in the world, haven't we? Mary reflected, her hand resting on her stomach where their child grew. Our own little corner of this vast prairie. We have, Ryder agreed, kissing the top of her head. And it all started because you were too stubborn to wait for help with that wagon. Mary laughed, the sound joyful in the gathering darkness. And because you were too stubborn to ride on by. Best decision of my life, Ryder declared, turning to kiss her properly. As the kiss deepened, Mary silently agreed. From broken wagon to broken heart mended, from solitary travelers to families soon to be three, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. Two hands, indeed, were better than one, especially when they were joined in love and purpose beneath the vast Kansas sky.